you probably might know how I feel about biopics. Biopics is not exactly kind of like my favorite kind of genre because of the creative liberties that many people have. Although sometimes I do, sometimes I can stumble with some that can catch my interest and decide to go watch it. Sometimes it can be for the better or for the worse. So, but with that out of the way, I will say that I do was really anticipating the movie of today, which is none other than Michael, the biopic about one of the greatest musicians that this planet could ever had, which is of course Michael Jackson. And I'm giving a little bit too much of a high note because as a as a guy who actually reaches kind of like the middle of the road of his life, I will say that I I am indeed a fan of Michael Jackson during the time on this time period. I I did grew up listening a lot of his music, and still to this day I do love once in a while pop some of his songs. Particularly, of course, Billie Jean, Smooth Criminal is actually one of my favorites. Uh, they Don't Care About Us is actually also one of my favorites. Obviously, Thriller is still a fan favorite. But if you know, but I am of course very aware that for every yin there's also a yang, in which Michael Jackson, despite being a very talented musician, he is also one of those guys who have quite a life of controversies, especially in the late '90s and the 2000s is when his lifestyle went on a little bit of a nosedive because of some of his life choices, some perspective about people, some mental breakdowns that he had, and of course the time which he pass away. But so there are times that we could separate the art from the artist, and we will admit that he was indeed really kind of like a very interesting musician. So I don't. I'm not exactly, how can I say, on the stance to judge too much about his personal lifestyle. I still kind of listen to his because, well, let's say that the controversies of his life is kind of a little bit vague to kind of judge if he did this or not did that. I don't want to go too much into kind of like details. I'm mostly gonna talk about, well, the movie that came out, named Michael, which it had the movie itself it is technically funded by a lot of the Jackson family, even to the point that his nephew, Jafar Jackson, is the one that decided to take the role of his uncle called Michael. Um, so that was kind of like one of the things that intrigued me to go and watch the movie. But on the other hand, It's a Lionsgate biopic. This is where I got a little bit my concerns because I know how Lionsgate is when it's about biopics. I still feel a little bit hurt after watching that biopic named what was it, Arthur the King, which that was pretty much insulting, and so when it's about creative, and you know that when it's about creative liberties on people's lives or an event, I am very picky when it's about how well it is portrayed, because well, the problem is that some people can take a biopic very seriously and think that that this is how it's gonna how that event happened, and so instead of make the kind of like the bigger research and find out the inconsistencies of a movie and to find out where the whole truth is. This is a pet peeve that I usually have with biopics. But I am of course open to if there's kind of like a creative liberty that feels justified, because well, to be fair, we're not psychics. We won't know how exactly things happen unless we have a photographic memory that we could press our button and make it a movie out of it. So with that said, how's the movie? How's the movie in itself? Well, here's the thing. This movie is getting panned by critics. I'm not, and this is one of the few times that I wanted to go with an open mind, and I can see a little bit why critics pan it, but at the same time, I think that there are parts that I think that they're kind of harsh on it, because as even trying to put a kind of like a constructive criticism to the movie, I think that the movie is flawed, yes, but I will say that I enjoyed the film in itself, and maybe it's because the movie itself, if you grew up with Michael Jackson, you can find some charm into it, and I did. It has this nostalgia bait, of course, because it showcases some of the music, and there's kind of like this energy to bring a movie about this celebrity that a lot of people even still to this day have some good memories of it. So in the end, yeah, it is. The movie is done well, but I think that maybe the movie asked a little bit too much, because it wanted to be about Michael Jackson. It's one of the greatest musicians of all time. That is technically his title, and of course, it feels like it needed to be something big. But what we got at a result on this movie is that probably it was more like a by the number biopic, and it showcased kind of like this by the number story of a child going through the celebrities, and in this case, it's mostly kind of like more like between the. It showcases kind of like the span of Michael Jackson's life from when he was with the Jackson 5, when he was a little child, and he has his band with his brothers, and of course this goes all through kind of like the 80s, when he becomes famous. He decides to go solo. He made Thriller, Billie Jean, and it technically ends up with it also covers the when he had the pyrotechnic accident during the shooting of the Pepsi commercial it was a kind of like a pyrotechnic. For those who doesn't know him much, but I doubt that you might not know, he suffered an accident over there that burned his hair. It made him a little bit scalp. Now from that point on, he had to depend on medication, and then of course he makes also a final tour with the Jackson 5, and and well, the movie ends with a rendition of Bad. Uh, uh, but this I just technically summarize a little bit the movie in itself, that what it covers. But what I didn't tell you much, but this is also a little bit kind of like the crux of the movie, is that it mostly kind of covers also Michael Jackson's complicated relationship with his father, Joe Jackson, in which man, that I know that, as you know, there have been a lot of stories about how he was technically an abusive father, a grifter who he technically he basically made his children. He trained them hard in order to make their lives out of music, so he can profit out of their fame. He technically was their manager, and of course, when Michael decides to go solo, the movie kind of portrays him like, oh no, you don't. There've been stories about, of course, how harsh it is. Although there's also technically, according to some interviews, despite the harshness that the father was, they really there are kind of like stories saying that they don't have much of. Even Michael himself say that they don't have much of kind of like an ill feelings toward him, because despite the harsh treatment, it still kind of formed them. So it's almost like it was kind of like a give and take kind of attitude that it happened. But at the same time, also the movie kind of wanted to portray that Michael, because of his life of stardom and trying his best, to become a musician and all this stuff, he basically felt like he has no childhood. Instead of trying to play outside or playing like games like children, he kind of stuck into this childlike wonder. And this is why even when he grows up and gets all the money, he likely preferred to buy all these exotic pets or toys like Twister and all this stuff. And so pretty much that's the whole kind of like the speculation that they have with him, or it really was. So that's pretty much the whole thing that I have with this movie. That, well, it does have kind of like this pacing, I'll say. I'll get to that a little bit. I think I already covered a little bit the synopsis of the movie, so I will of course talk about that. In acting wise, I will say that this movie is one of the strengths that it has. Jafar Jackson, he really, really does a great job portraying his uncle Michael. Right to the teeth, that they kind of really did a good job on the makeup. I don't know if I can't judge if they also use some CGI special effects in order to make him really look like Michael Jackson, and I hope that I don't find out that they did, because that will give a little bit of minus points to the movie. Well, you know me that I'm a little bit picky when it's about practical effects, but acting wise, he kind of nailed his uncle. Both I always talk like this, and in the moment in which he has the afro and all this stuff. Oh yeah, but not just that. I will also give credit to the kid who played his younger self when he when he was a little child with the bigger afro. The child also nailed it very well. And acting wise, they do that one I have no problem. Although the movie mostly wanted to center a lot about Michael and the mother and the father, but the siblings are must kind of just there, I'll say. And we know that it was kind of like a big family. They have what was it, the four brothers, Latoya Jackson, but you might also notice that Janet Jackson is not on the movie. She basically disappeared, and I've been hearing that it's because Janet Jackson didn't approve the likeness of that movie, so she's absent. So that kind of makes this movie a little bit odd. I'll say that you know how picky I am when it's about that. Maybe maybe for the sake. You know what? I was about to say that since we are in the age of AI, maybe you could have an AI Janet Jackson that doesn't look like her, but then that will be a lot of lawsuits, and even Janet will be so angry. I'll say. Oh yeah, and let me talk about who played the father, Joe Jackson, or they call him Josh Joseph. He played by Coleman Domingo. The way they portrayed the father is kind of a little bit played like the villain, but let's say that the actor really does a kind of like this good job on playing the very, very, very strict father. I mean, they even show a scene with him beating Michael Jackson with little Michael Jackson with a belt, and every time he goes there, he's basically the movie kind of treats him like a villain. I don't know if this one's intentional, although they tried to humanize him a little bit, but it wasn't enough. They still kind of treat him like he's kind of like a drifter or something like that. So, in ways. I want to know, did this make him dirty or something like that? Because that kind of showcased that despite everything, nobody has kind of a little bit of basically good memories of him, because, well, he was kind of like really, really harsh. But at the same time, it's almost like one of those anime masters in which they care for their students, but they're not kind of like they're basically the strict characters, let's say. But it wasn't technically very much treated like that. He was just kind of like there and every time trying to take advantage of Michael's popularity. And so much that every time when Michael wants to go solo, he's like, what are you doing? And the whole movie kind of treats him like Michael is trying to be independent. He wants to be free. He wants to do whatever he wants, but his father won't let him. And of course, there's the mother, Catherine Jackson, played by Nia Long, who she's basically kind of like the supportive mother who tries her best, to support Michael in his needs and everything. Yeah, and of course, there are some other supporting characters that I kind of forget who is who. There is one of the Beach Boys. There are the record managers who who they work with Michael. There's the chauffeur. There is this kind of like this guy who I don't know who it is, but he's kind of like Michael's agent that follows him around. Forgive me, I forget who is who. Let's say there's also a scene that kind of feels like a villain scene that involves not only the father, but there's also this Don King lookalike. Who, yeah, he plays Don King because Joe Jackson was also a boxer, but that was kind of a little bit almost during the final moments of the movie, which they're sitting on they're sitting on kind of like on the chimney, and they're kind of like, you know what, I'm gonna make Michael lose his liberty. So I'm gonna do this. No disrespect to the father. I'm just saying how the movie kind of portrays him. And this is where I go also with the cinematography, in which, well, let's say that the pacing of the movie at least took it as someone who is interested on the life of Michael Jackson, and I know that there are some better ways to know about Michael Jackson's life. I would say that it was decent. I wasn't bored. I was just watching that. It's still kind of like the by the numbers movie, in which it kind of tries to paint a little bit too Michael a little bit too much in a positive light, because I think that this is what they wanted to make this movie, more like a tribute, so they don't see as much of. They kind of treated Michael a little bit kind of like the good guy, like a very good guy, and in ways he was. He did a lot of charity. He still has his childlike wonder, and sometimes a little bit of a spoiled rich kid, a little bit. In which he likes to buy toys and he likes to be with the people, or sometimes he becomes concerned when he watches the news about the violence of the Crips and the Bloods, or that he say, or when he is directing kind of like his own style of music videos, and of course the whole. Once in a while, you're gonna hear some of the music of the Jackson 5, as well as some moments in which this is where the movie kind of shines a little bit in the nostalgia bait, where you hear some of his popular songs, like for example, there's a moment with Thriller, and you see him doing the Thriller dance, even though without the makeup. I don't know why they did that. But at the end of the movie, we get a really, really excellent rendition of Bad. I already said that, but trust me that the editing and the way Jafar does all the Michael Jackson moves during that sequence is amazing. That is great. Although maybe I would say that it would have been better if they could at least tone down the sequences of probably like 5 or 6 cuts where you see some fan getting dragged by security. Because I know that Michael was so popular that fans are like, or they faint or something like that. But maybe they could cut down a little bit on that. But that's just me. But I do also have a nitpick when it's about when they portray some of the animals. Because here's the weird thing: I don't know which animal was CGI or which animal was real. Although most of them are CG because, well, they can't use kind of like wild animals nowadays, because one is risky. It's risky for both the animal and the humans in there. But I know that there was a snake, the llama, a giraffe, and 2 peacocks, and they the CGI. If they're made CGI, they look decent enough. But I do have a big problem with Bubbles the chimpanzee. For those who doesn't know, Michael Jackson did indeed own a chimpanzee. He names it Bubbles. But the CGI of the chimpanzee is not good. You'll definitely see how much of a CGI it is, and this is me coming from a guy who saw Primate, and Primate has better chimp effects than this one. That one looks a little bit too cheap. So much that one really begged to be animatronic. So no, that CGI chimp didn't work. And honestly, this is where I gotta give a little bit of points down. It's just for that chimp. And let me tell you, that kind of remind me that the day prior, with a group of friends, we decided to watch that awful Lost in Space movie when we did have that awful CGI chimp. It's not that bad, but it's funny that I got 2 bad CGI chimps in the span of 2 days. that was kind of like hilarious. That is kind of like hilarious. So honestly, I will say that I think that I cover a little bit much about what I think about this movie, and I'm a little bit more forgiving to this movie, even though the biopic, for a biopic, it is I will say that it can be a little bit too condescending on Michael Jackson, but I'm not gonna go too much fault into that because it's basically his family trying to honor him. And I think that is probably it. And criticism, of course, is valid. It's valid. I don't know why critics kind of put it kind of like very, very, very low. Some people, I think it's probably because they say that it's a little bit too safe to buy the numbers, or it feels kind of like wash. But if they say that, this is when I show them movies like the Unbreakable Boy or the Arthur the King, which those are even worse, I'll say. So I'm more forgiving about this movie, that even though it is by the numbers, if you are kind of like in the mood for Michael Jackson, you're gonna get some enjoyment out of it. Although, in a ways, I gotta admit that I do have a little bit of a guilty pleasure with the really self-indulgent Michael Jackson movie that is named Moonwalker. Well, I kind of did grew up with Moonwalker, and I do have a little bit of a guilty pleasure out of it, because it's basically kind of like a big collection of music videos that end up with, Michael Jackson turning into a car and a robot and a jetpack. Oh, that kind of reminds me that the movie also tries a little bit too hard to be subtle, because it always showcased, Michael being a big fan of Disney movies. It just also, I think it was kind of a little bit of a treat for movie philias that to sit there and see Michael Jackson watching on the TVs all of these movies, like he watches Pinocchio or Charlie Chaplin movies, and even some horror movies like House of Wax with Vincent Price, or Night of the Living Dead and The Fly. That was a little bit of kind of like a little bit of a treat, at least. That's what I think. But the movie sometimes wants to a little bit cram into your head that he is a big fan of Peter Pan, and this one, if if you're kind of like the history of Michael Jackson, you'll be, oh yeah, I get it. His ranch is gonna be named Neverland because he's a child, and they really, that part I do admit that they really try a little bit too hard, I'll say it, in which so yeah, I can understand the mixed feelings that some of the critics have, but on a personal note, I did think that I did enjoy this movie for what it is, considering that it could have been a little bit worse. So yeah, if I want to give it a score, I'll give it a B minus or a B if I wanted to be a little bit generous. And by the way, the funny thing about at the end of the movie is that the movie ends with this tagline saying, "The story continues." Almost like a Marvel tagline. But in my head, it was like, no, please, no. We don't need a sequel. Let this movie be just itself, because we know that from this point, Michael Jackson is gonna have his ups and downs, and it's gonna be quite a ride. But I did heard that if this movie is successful, there is a plan for a second part. You know what? Go ahead. I'm curious if they're gonna do that. We will see how it will go on. But at the same time, do I recommend Michael? Well, if you're a big fan of Michael Jackson, yes, I could give it a shot. And again, I do really praise the effort that has been gone through, and Jafar Jackson trying to doing the imitation of Michael Jackson. He really does the job really, really, really well. I just root for him, and of course everyone going through with it. So check it out. It's not bad.